such a good question, just a good segue and lead into the discussion here in the PowerPoint slides is that it is a focus on um, ROI and making sure that organizations implement technology not just for technology's sake, but that they're focused on the actual ROI. I think that's probably first and foremost, and that is really why we wanted to talk about that exact topic about maximizing the ROI of digital transformation. So, Kyler, if you don't mind just popping that into presentation mode, and then we can start flipping through those, and we'll start off with the quick introduction here as well. As far as my background, for those of you that don't know, my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage. Spent a lot of time working with organizations throughout the world and with our teams throughout the world, including our team in the EMEA regions there. I've been doing ERP consulting, digital transformation consulting now for about 25 years. I started off at one of the big system integrators and continued my career for the first 10 years or so working with different consulting organizations after that large one. And then in more recent years have focused on becoming more of a leader in the independent consulting space. So helping clients select and implement different types of technologies. So that's a little bit of my background and where I started. I actually spent quite a bit of time in my career working within Europe and Africa in particular. I've done some work in Middle East as well, but Europe and Africa, I've done quite a bit of work. So looking forward to the questions and discussion here with the audience here in the region. So are those slides, are you able to advance the slides, Kyler?
Yeah. Do you see it, Eric?
No, I do. I see it, just the title slide, and it's not in presentation mode.
Interesting. Okay. Again,
There you
always.
go. It just advanced, but it's still in the not in the presentation mode. So if you just hit the little icon at the bottom right there, it should allow you to pop that into presentation mode.
Yeah. Can you see the presentation node at this point?
No, just the outline of the slides there.
Interesting.
But I'll keep talking because we can't see the slide. That's the good news.
Right.
And so
right.
the
Let's meet Third Stage at least.
Yep. Yep. So as far as who we are as an organization, we're 100% technology agnostic, and we're a consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journey. So we're doing everything from helping clients define what their system is going to be, what their overall digital strategy is going to be, as well as how they're going to manage those projects with PMO, organizational change management, process improvement, and whatnot. So our whole job is really to be that independent technology advisor throughout the implementation in helping clients throughout that whole process.
And, I'm going to just stop sharing here and just share my whole screen so you can see the presentation mode. So it looks a little bit better here. So just give me a second.
Sure.
Here.
Sounds great.
It's, it's 2 a.m. here, folks, in the United States. So just, bear with us, right? How's that look, Eric?
Actually, yeah, that looks great. That's perfect. Thank you. And then you can also hide that question if you don't mind too, the question from the opening. Because I don't think I can do that as a speaker here. So in terms of how we help, some of the things I mentioned, we do digital strategy, software evaluation selection, as well as the implementation project quality assurance, which can be two different types of roles we play. We're either helping provide milestone-based and ongoing quality assurance in more of a background advisory role, and we also provide more hands-on PMO, program management types of services to take a more active role in the implementation at the PMO level. So those are sort of the two ways that we help clients manage their project management and governance. And then within that, we also help with business process advisement, organizational change, and also implementation readiness. As Kyler mentioned, we also do quite a bit of expert witness work as well, which we hope none of you on the call here will ever have to hire us for. But that is an area where we take a lot of our lessons from ERP and digital transformation related lawsuits, and we take lessons from those failures to help make our own implementation services better. And that's a big part of what our thought leadership is based on, is on these different lessons from those projects.
Don't worry. We're working out the kinks here.
No worries, and I'll keep chatting. I'll verbalize the slides in the meantime. And if need be, I can share it, Kyler. I can share my whole screen. It would just show everything. So let me know if I need to do that. Um, so the other thing that's worth noting is sort of answering the question for your organization, which is going to be a different answer than what other organizations might come up with. But the whole idea here is determining what exactly is digital transformation. What does it mean to your organization? For some organizations, they're focused on deploying a single ERP, enterprise-wide sort of technology. Others are focused on a more specific solution like a human capital management or CRM, warehouse management, whatever the case may be. And in other cases, organizations are focused on more incremental. There's some cases where organizations are focused on a more incremental improvement to their technology, whereas other organizations might be taking more of a broader and holistic quantum leap sort of adjustment to their transformation. So I think that's the first thing, is to really understand that there's a lot of technology out there in the marketplace. There's a lot of technology that you could be deploying, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should necessarily be deploying all those technologies. So a big part of the start of a successful digital transformation and realizing that ROI is first defining what technology or technologies are going to be the most effective. And so that's when you start to learn about all these different technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, all these different technologies out there. It's really important to just recognize, realistically for us as a business, what is it that we're going to benefit the most from? What's going to deliver the most business value? And let's focus on those technologies rather than taking more of a shotgun or a scattershot approach to deploying different technologies. And so the problem with most digital strategies, as you can see on this slide, is that there's so many organizations that fail to reach that third stage of success. And our company is named after that analogy, that third stage analogy, which is actually a rocket launch analogy. And when a rocket typically launches, it typically has the first two-stage boosters that get the rocket into space. And then the third stage booster is what will ultimately get the rocket up to its ultimate height and speed in orbit. And so the problem with digital transformations, much like rocket launches, is that so many of these transformations don't ever reach that third stage of success in delivering actual business value and ROI that's expected from the organization. So that's a big challenge and a big part of what organizations struggle with. And so when we're talking through this presentation and as we're helping clients that we work with, our whole goal is really focused on helping ensure that we reach that third stage of transformation success, and that we're able to get past those first two stages where most organizations get stuck or they never really get past those points. So we can move on to the next one, please. There we go. And so another thing to think about as you define your digital transformation strategy, in the spirit of defining a digital strategy that's actually going to deliver business value and it's going to help you maximize business value, is to recognize and understand and articulate what sort of transformation you're really looking for. And this is just an example of sort of two different scenarios where you might have a traditional ERP implementation, which 20 years ago, 10 years ago, a lot of organizations were deploying ERP implementations the same way they are today. And that's part of the problem with the industry, is that we haven't really evolved our learnings and our best practices to how to make these projects more successful. And you can see that when we look at different components of implementations versus full digital transformations, you see that you might have a different approach or a different deliberate way of handling different dimensions of your transformation. And there's different risk profiles and there's different cost benefit trade-offs that go along with that. And so when you look at this slide here, the sort of the comparison between your traditional ERP or HCM or CRM deployment versus a broader, more comprehensive digital transformation, you see a couple things. One is that on the more comprehensive digital transformation side of things, you're generally focusing more on business process improvement, more on actual business value versus just deploying technology for technology's sake. And so a lot of times what happens is not that ERP implementations don't deliver business value, but they themselves on their own, the technologies do not deliver business value. It's with the process improvements, with the people improvements, with the right aligned strategies and that sort of thing. That's how those sorts of projects become more successful. And so the key here too is to recognize that if you're doing a more incremental, let's just call it a more incremental ERP upgrade versus a more complete transformation and a more of a bigger leap in your technology capabilities, those are two different risk profiles. It's going to take you longer to do the sort of the right side of the screen. There's higher risk. There's ultimately more potential business value, but we have to recognize it's a bigger impact to the organization. And sometimes that change can be harder to manage if we're taking on a more complete transformation sort of approach. And so if we look at the top challenges that organizations face after they've recently gone through digital transformations, these are the top 5 things that organizations struggle with. And you see that the number one thing that organizations that have gone through transformations, the number one thing that they struggle with is organizational change and just managing the people side of the transformation. So that's hands down the number one challenge that organizations face. But in a close second is transformational misalignment with strategic objectives. So when we see organizations that have a digital strategy that doesn't match and doesn't align and support a overall organizational strategy, that's where you start to run into challenges. And that's where you get diminished business value. That's when you start to run into projects that are over budget and over time and whatnot. Number 3 is difficulty managing and addressing deficiencies with the system integrator. So in other words, organizations are deferring too much to the system integrators, letting them take too much control of the project without addressing the deficiencies and the gaps of the system integrators. So an analogy I like to use is that it's a lot like an organization wants to build a house, let's just say, and they want to do so by calling in a plumber. And so rather than calling in a general contractor, an architect, and laying the foundation, all that stuff, and then bringing in the contractor, so to speak, organizations are starting straight with a myopic solution, which is a system integrator, which only provides part of the solution and doesn't address the other parts of the transformation. So just making sure that you are able to manage the system integrator rather than the system integrator managing you, and that you're able to fill those gaps and address those deficiencies of the system integrator is a very important success factor. And then finally, the last 2 things are clarity of business processes. And so organizations that don't have that clarity of what their business processes are going to be in that future state target operating model, those organizations are going to struggle a lot more with their implementations to deliver value and to finish on time and on budget. And they're more likely to have operational disruptions as well along the way. And then finally, the 5th thing is the data migration. So just challenges with data cleansing, data mapping, and that sort of thing is a challenge as well. And then I mentioned the word operational disruption a moment ago, and it's worth calling this out because part of the problem that organizations have, there's really, I guess you could call it 3 different major risks with transformations. One is that you're not able to implement on time or on budget. Second is you're not able to deliver the business value and ROI that you expect or should be able to get from the transformation if you had managed it better. And then the 3rd thing that's sort of falls in between those first 2 things, and it's something that organizations don't think a lot about, is the operational disruption that's caused during a transformation. And what does that cost and that risk to the organization? And so it's almost like trying to mitigate your risk or trying to manage the downside risk of negative business benefits. So just to give you an example, if you're an organization, you go live with new technology and you can't ship product for 2 months because the project is such a mess and you can't deploy and you're not successful in deploying that technology, that challenge can lead to something like not being able to ship product. And if you're not able to ship product, chances are that you may lose orders. There's revenue impacts, profit impacts, that sort of thing. So really understanding what that risk of that sort of operational disruption is important. And what we found over the years of doing this research, it's a remarkably steady metric over the years, which is that somewhere between 51 and 54% of organizations that go through digital transformations realize some sort of operational disruption, a material operational disruption. So I'm not just talking about a few hiccups here and there. I'm talking about major operational disruptions like we can't ship product, we can't close the books, we can't run payroll, something major like that where it is a material impact and it affects your customers, your employees, or some combination of both. And the cost of that, the cost of what that operational disruption impact might be, is typically exponentially more than the cost of the actual implementation itself, or it can be if the operational disruption is severe enough. And that additional cost that's added to the cost of the actual transformation as a result of that operational disruption can range anywhere from 50% to 300% of what the initial implementation costs were. So I think that's a very important thing to consider as well and to watch. Oops. So now I just want to shift gears and talk about how, what is it we do about it? So I've talked a little bit about the risks and the challenges of transformation, what some of the differences are between a more incremental technology upgrade versus a more material digital transformation. So now it's worth talking about, well, what do we do to ensure that we maximize business value, not only during the implementation, but also post-implementation as well, to make sure we're getting the most value that we possibly can out of this investment in time and money and resources that we've just made in new technology. And it's worth thinking about now, even if you haven't started the project yet, it's worth thinking about. And so what we want to do is share some themes or best practices of what we see that delivers the most business value to our clients. And so the first thing that you can see here is to start with a phase zero when you get into the implementation phase. And what we mean by this is sort of implementation planning, implementation readiness phase of the project. And it sounds intuitive as I'm talking about it, but it's important to understand what dynamic most organizations fall into. And that dynamic is most organizations' instincts are to go pick new technology, go evaluate a few options, pick the ones that are the best fits for you, and then start designing, building, and deploying stuff. And it sounds basic enough, but the problem there is organizations typically rush too much into the implementation, actual execution mode without having clarity and a vision of what the overall plan is, what a realistic plan is, what the realistic budget is, all the planning activities that need to happen to really serve as that foundation or that blueprint for a successful transformation. And again, I'll use that home building analogy. When you're building a house or a building, the first thing you do, or one of the first things you do, is you design a blueprint. You design a blueprint of how all the pieces are going to fit together, what the overall design is going to be, what materials are going to go into it, what contractors are going to fill those roles, all that sort of thing. And so most organizations or most people intuitively understand that you wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. But organizations do it all the time. They go into these transformations without a blueprint, and they say, "We'll just pick the technology, and then our implementation partner, system integrator, will provide the competencies for us to implement that technology." And again, it's important to think of this as more than just an implementation, a technology implementation, but think of it more as a transformation that involves one piece of it is technology, but there's other pieces related to process improvement, the people side of change, the strategy alignment, all that good stuff. And so it's important to think about it in that way. So rather than building a house with running water by calling the plumber first and foremost, which is what a lot of organizations do, is they call a system integrator or a software vendor to come in and help them solve that specific problem. It's important to back up and create a blueprint and a realistic plan and in a way that's technology agnostic as well. So that phase zero is really important. And what that does is it puts you in control of the project. It allows you to have that ownership, that internal buy-in and ownership of the project. And it's also a way to drive internal alignment too. And I saw there was a question that popped up around internal alignment and whether or not that is something that can diminish business value. And that's absolutely true. If you don't have internal alignment, you're going to run into delays, you're going to have budget overruns, and you're ultimately not going to get the business value you want. And by the way, perhaps even more importantly, you're going to have higher risk in the project if you don't have that internal alignment and common understanding of what this project means and how it's going to impact your business. And so that phase zero helps in a secondary beneficiary kind of way by reducing the risk of not having that alignment, which is a root cause of why so many organizations struggle. And so if we could go to the next slide here, the next thing is to understand and be deliberate about ensuring that your business drives technology. And so ensuring that there's an internal understanding that this is not just an IT project and that business process improvements should drive new technology rather than the other way around. And you want to make sure that the transformation is closely aligned with measurable strategic goals and business ROI. And so, the reason here this is important is that organizations too often flip that equation. They think that they're going to lead with technology, and those technology improvements will drive the business improvements. And there's a couple of problems with that. One is, first and foremost, there's deficiencies and gaps and weaknesses with any technology you might deploy. So you don't want to assume that your technology is going to solve all your problems. But secondly, technology is becoming more and more flexible as time goes on, and you're able to do more with technology. There's more decisions and more options and more configuration workflow options you can have. And so by having a clear understanding of the business needs first and letting the technology support that rather than the other way around, you're going to make those technology initiatives a lot more successful in terms of implementing on time, on budget, but also minimizing the risk of failure and some of the operational disruptions, and ultimately maximizing the business value and ROI longer term. And so really
Yeah.
letting your business serve as that blueprint is a key part of this as well.
And I think this is a good time to address this question because I think it's really important. So, how much time and effort should be dedicated to analyzing the broken as is versus the to be in this letting the business drive technology? Eric, can you help us understand that?
Yeah. So there's a good amount of time depending on how broken or how much you want to improve your business processes. So the more broken they are, the more you're trying to improve them, the longer this exercise will take. So it really does depend on that. Um, it also depends on the scope. How much of your business are you re-engineering, or what
Hmm.
functional business processes are in scope. And so you want to make sure you have that understanding of the scope first. But I think the key here is I'll kind of address the last part of that question about the difficulty of visualizing to be processes. A lot of times organizations don't know how to do this. They don't know where to start. They think that they need the technology answered first before they can really define process improvements. And the way I describe process improvement, and a good way to think about it in understanding, those macro business needs versus the more detailed transactional configuration needs of software, is to think about, if you're familiar with I don't remember what organization it is that created this nomenclature, but there's five different levels of business process definition. At level one is sort of your really high level end to end macro processes, and you work your way down levels of detail and sub processes within those business processes, and then you get down to the micro level of transactions and workflows within the technology, and that's the level five. So you have somewhere between level one and level five. Level five is very dependent on what technology you deploy. So you need to know how the software works, what the configuration options are, and it's really going to sort of drive a lot of the detailed level five business processes. But if you're talking about level one and two, sort of those higher level processes, you can be defining those in an independent and technology agnostic way that allows you to define end-to-end business processes that is relevant regardless of what technology you use. Certainly, certain technologies will make those processes more efficient and more effective, but you have a general vision of what those processes are from a technology agnostic point of view. So if you view it as sort of five layers of business process, levels one and two, and maybe even level three are going to be things you can do upfront independently of what technologies you do or don't deploy. And then as you get into level four, level five, that's where it becomes more technology dependent. Now, again, certainly some technologies, like for example, artificial intelligence, let's just say, that is more likely to have a big material impact on your level one, level two, level three. But I think the key is you still can define business processes in a way that's independent of the technology to really drive those needs and understanding of how you might use something like an artificial intelligence, for example. So I think that's really a key way to think about that.
Absolutely. Well, let's keep walking through these, Eric, and then we can get to some more questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. We can see all of them. Some great conversations around Industry 5.0 from Albert here, because we weren't even ready for 4.0. So we're we're moving
Right.
into emerging technologies already.
Yep. Yep. Good stuff. And then, another lesson learned for maximizing business value is to have realistic expectations. Some of the biggest challenges in a transformation can be traced back to the fact that the organization and the team never had realistic expectations to begin with. And so if you just sort of play that out a little bit in understanding in slow motion how this dynamic affects a transformation, what ends up happening typically is organizations will reach out to software vendors and or system integrators. Those third parties come in and give you sort of that sales spin or that sales message of what they think an implementation might cost in terms of time and money. And typically, those proposals or those scenarios are based on overly optimistic assumptions. They assume that you're just going to deploy technology and everything's going to be perfect and everyone's going to be happy. But what they don't account for is the complexity of your business, the impact to your organization, potential people and process issues that always creep up in these projects. And so they come in with these plans that become sort of gospel within organizations, and those plans and those budgets that are in the proposals from the system integrators oftentimes end up serving as the foundation for those unrealistic expectations. And so let's just say a vendor comes in and says we can implement our technology in 18 months for say 10 million is the cost in whatever local currency. And so whatever, which I know is a huge variation depending with all the different currencies we have on the phone today, but just as an example here, let's just say the proposal is 18 months and 10 million in cost. And in reality, maybe it was never going to be a project that could ever possibly complete it in 18 months. It was always going to be more like 24 or 36 months and maybe double that budget. That's the more realistic answer. But the problem is the organization has staked its entire project on this unrealistic and faulty plan and budget. And so what ends up happening is the organization and the team quickly realizes as it gets into the implementation that, oops, we made a mistake. We're going to be way over time and over budget. And typically that's not palatable to most management teams. And so what ends up happening is then organizations start throttling back. They cut scope, they cut activities in the work plan, they try what they can to cut time and money from the implementation. And typically they cut things that shouldn't be cut, that are going to actually increase your risk and increase your costs longer term. So that's when organizations start making bad decisions like cutting testing cycles or cutting training and cutting change management from scope. And so it leads to a bunch of bad decisions that then snowball and create ultimately a failure in many cases. And at the very least, it diminishes business value. It minimizes the value you can get from the technology that you were trying to deploy, all because you had unrealistic expectations up front. So the key here is to really recognize that dynamic and understand that when you get a proposal from outside third parties, they're trying to sell you software and technology services, there is reason and there's good benefit to being a bit skeptical of those and making sure that you have a realistic, sort of sanitized view of what the implementation time and cost is going to be. And then another lesson that we have as far as maximizing business value is if you assume that your organization has limited time and resources, meaning that it's not infinite, you don't have unlimited time and resources. So there's some limitation on how much time and money you have to do whatever transformation you're trying to do. Then it's important to recognize that since you have limited time and resources, you don't want to overcomplicate the selection process. You want to make sure that you implement really well. And that's a key important point here, because a lot of times organizations get so stuck on the evaluation process, either because they don't have the right technology agnostic inputs, or they don't understand what their options are, or because they get caught up in analysis paralysis. Whatever the case may be, a lot of organizations, when they fail, they actually start failing early on before they've ever picked the technology, because they spend so much time and money trying to pick the right technology, and they could have done it a lot faster and a lot cheaper if they, had the right outside help. And shameless plug here, that's what Third Stage Consulting does for its clients, is help clients select and implement software faster and cheaper than they would otherwise, just because we have that experience and that agnostic view. And so organizations that recognize this and recognize that, yes, we need to be thorough in our evaluation. We want to make sure we get the decision right, but with the right outside guidance and the right tool set, if we can do that faster and with more limited resources, then that's going to allow us to put more money and time on the implementation to make sure that part gets right. And a good way to think about this is for every hour or dollar you spend on the evaluation and selection process, that's one less hour or dollar that you have to spend on the actual implementation itself. And so again, it's a balancing act. You want to be thorough. You want to get the right answer. You don't want to make the wrong decision. You don't want to rush the decision, but you also don't want to overcomplicate it. So recognizing that you need to invest heavily in the implementation and really focus on getting that right. Even if it were to mean you have imperfect technology, but you implement it really well, that's usually a better bet than having the perfect technology that took you a long time to figure out and vet, but you don't implement as well. I'd always take that first scenario over the second. And granted, there's a middle ground or there's a gray area in between, but hopefully that illustrates the point of the importance of implementation.
Absolutely, Eric. And let's answer this great question here from Sam Graham, who's one of our great community members. Is when businesses are running several projects in parallel, how easy or realistic is it to measure ROI? I think this is a really interesting and important question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Sam. And when businesses are running several projects in parallel, or even if they aren't, so I mean, let's just broaden the question here a little bit and say, even just for let's just assume this is your only major project. Um, how realistic is it to measure? First of all, I'd say it's important. It's extremely important to measure ROI, whether you have one project or whether you have multiple. But I think the key is that you do want to measure it, or else you're not going to achieve it. You're not going to achieve what you don't measure. And so that's why, starting up front in the digital strategy and that phase zero that we talked about, that implementation readiness, one of the most important things you can do in that phase is define what that business case is, what the benefits realization plan is, how people are going to achieve those business benefits, and using that not only to justify the project, but more importantly, using that business case as a mechanism to provide project governance into the project. So, in other words, we can use our business case as a decision making tool if we've done it right. It's a decision making tool to help ensure that we make the right decisions during the project from a project governance perspective. So, that extra module that someone might suggest that we add on to the scope does that additional module help us deliver on our business case, or does that piece of customization that we know we shouldn't do because we know that it's going to increase our cost and our risk if we do the customization, how does that tie back to our business case and ROI? So the ROI analysis really becomes a mechanism for making good decisions during the implementation. Certainly justifying the project is another benefit of having a good business case and ROI analysis, but third, and perhaps even most importantly, that same mechanism allows you to have a good framework for managing benefits post go live. So after technology is deployed, what can you do to improve and optimize those business benefits? That's a key part of why that business case is so important and so beneficial in that way. So great question there. And then another challenge or thing to recognize when you're trying to maximize your ROI for any sort of transformation is to recognize that there are no silver bullets. So there's no easy answer. There's no perfect decision you can make that minimizes all of your risk. There's always going to be a trade-off, in most decisions you make for a transformation. Even something as fundamental as, do we deploy a single enterprise-wide technology to answer all of our problems, or do we deploy more of a best of breed approach, multiple technologies, multiple solutions, point solutions throughout the organization that perhaps better fit those functional needs of different parts of the business, but now it's created a risk because we have to integrate those systems. And there's always risk with integration. There's cost, there's data issues, that sort of thing. So that's an example of where neither answer is perfect. And we could probably have a full-on debate here with the audience and with Kyler and I, arguing the merits of all these different decisions you have to make during a transformation, like single enterprise-wide technology versus best of breed. That's a great example. We could sit here all day and argue both sides of that, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's more a matter of understanding what the trade-offs are, what the value is of each of those options, and ensuring that you pick a path on all these different decisions that best align with and fit your needs. And so really recognizing that is really important. It's, if you feel like you're getting an answer or you're making a decision that has completely eliminated your risk, then you're probably not thinking about the risk or recognizing the risk appropriately, because every decision is going to have risk. You're just trading one risk for another. And so it may be that one scenario is going to deliver less risk, and that's fine, but you just want to recognize what those trade-offs are. So no silver bullets. There's no easy answers. Things like pre-configured solutions and best practices. That's all sales jargon. It's industry jargon that we all created in this industry to help sell more software. And so, and when I say we, I don't mean third stage, because third stage does not sell software, but as an industry, the technology industry is designed to sell software. So you really have to take some of those silver bullets, that sales messaging, take it with a grain of salt, and just recognize that there are risks with whatever path you might go down. And then the next dynamic here that we want to be aware of and mindful of is ensuring that you own your project and recognize this is your project. You don't want to be rushed into prematurely deploying when you're not ready. You don't want to start just spinning your wheels designing and building technology without a clear understanding of what the roadmap is, what the blueprint is, what the foundation is, all that stuff that we've talked about. And it really gets back to ownership and just making sure you recognize you're the organization that's going to have to live with whatever solution or solutions get deployed. And so you should be the one to run that. Now, granted, yes, you probably need outside help. You probably need technology consultants and other third parties that can help you. But just recognize that they have a specific role as a sort of a contractor in that home building analogy. And you need to be the one to help create sort of that internal ownership of that general contractor role, that general contractor and architect role. And that's a role we often help our clients fill is that general architecture and blueprint sort of role, helping clients define that so that they can ultimately be in control of the project and set their own tempo and manage conflicting priorities and making sure that you've dedicated the time and the plan that's going to best suit you as an organization. So that ownership is really important. The more an organization has ownership of a project with the right level of outside support that they're managing and aren't being managed by, those organizations are a lot more likely to be successful and deliver business value and minimize risk along the way. And then organizational change management. It's one of the best ways to maximize business value and ROI. People don't often think of organizational change as something that's a hard, tangible business benefit, but it absolutely is, especially if you do change right and don't just focus on the soft side of change, but the soft side of change connected to hard, tangible business benefits. And so, again, we don't want to do change management just for change management's sake. We want to make sure that we're doing change management to ensure that it's delivering business value and that we're maximizing business value and process improvements and organizational improvements that come with a successful transformation. And most organizations intuitively understand that change management is important, but most of them also think that change management equates to training and communications. And training and communications are very important parts of change management, don't get me wrong, but they're just two small portions of change management. If done right, change management also needs to focus on helping define and organize what the organization is going to look like in the future state, identifying what the impacts are to different parts of the organization, different work groups, different locations, different departments. Also focusing on executive alignment, benefits realization, all these different components of change that oftentimes get overlooked and myopically focus on communications and training. There's other dimensions that I would argue are even more important than communications and training. But most organizations and most system integrators don't focus on those things because it's not something you can touch and feel. It's not necessarily related directly to the technology itself. It's more related to how the organization is going to be impacted and what the new processes are going to look like. And so organizations tend to overlook it and not understand why that piece is so important and why a complete change management strategy and plan is so important as well. And then related to change management is user adoption. And so user adoption is part of change management. It's really technically under the change umbrella, but it's important to recognize and understand that user adoption is really important. And user adoption doesn't just happen through good training. Training will help enable user adoption, but you also want to make sure you have a detailed user adoption plan and strategy that goes beyond training. So making sure that you have technologies and tools that allow people to not only learn the new processes and systems in a sort of a classroom or a self-study environment, but also that they have the resources as they get into a live real-world environment with a new technology, new processes, making sure they have tools and resources to help them through the process post-implementation as well. And so an example of that is Third Stage has a digital adoption tool that it uses with its clients. It's a technology agnostic tool that works across platforms, that allows organizations to have not only training materials and training tools, but also online real time help and support as employees are going through any sort of transaction or workflow. So that Third Stage digital adoption tool set is something, as an example, that you can use to enable some of that user adoption, really making sure you get down to that granular level of going beyond just training and making sure that organizations and that the employees are comfortable with and have the resources to support their business processes is very important as well. And then finally, the biggest tip we can leave you with on terms of minimizing. I was kind of a maximizing and managing.
Minimizing.
Minimizing.
Welcome
I just
to new words.
yes, it's not very politically correct or gender friendly, but it is a new word that we just created.
I'm here
No, I was
for
going
it.
to say, no, a way to maximize business value is through independent program management. And this is where, especially if you don't have a really strong internal PMO capability, that independent project management, program management support is very helpful. And I think the key word here is program management. And whether you leverage outside help, independent help or not, it's important to think about your project as a program, and think about within that program a technical work stream where you have hired a software vendor and or a system integrator implementation partner to handle that one technical work stream. But there's other non-technical work streams as well: the change management, the data migration, the process improvements, the overall strategic alignment, all these different work streams of internal and external resources that need to be managed within an overall program, which is why you don't want to just have the system integrator or the technical work stream project manager be the overall program manager, because those are two different roles. And so if you don't have that, especially if you don't have that internal PMO capability, it's really important to leverage outside help on the program management side. And if you have internal PMO capabilities, that's great. That means you've got better, chances are you probably have better project controls and governance in place. It just as part of an internal mindset and process. And maybe you rely more on outside help, just more in an advisory capacity to help make sure that you are leveraging that outside experience and best practices for implementations within that PMO framework. So having that program management be effective is super important and a great way to deliver business value.
And one of the questions we have from our audience here, Eric, is around project governance for digital transformation. What requires more attention to successfully drive home goals of digital transformation? And maybe I'll evolve this question, but how do you ensure that that project governance is staying to that ownership tactic that you covered earlier in your presentation?
Yeah. So, the overall governance, there's a lot of complexity or a lot of alignment that needs to happen with program governance to ensure that it fits your business and your future state needs. So, just to give you an example, maybe answer the question in the form of an example of how you do it. Um, a big part of project governance is how you make decisions. How are we going to make decisions when we inevitably get the request to customize software or to add more technology to the mix in some way? And it's hard to make those decisions without just saying no because we don't have the budget for it, and we haven't planned for it, or yes because we're enticed by technology. So yeah, sure, we'll deploy new technology, or we'll customize the technology, and it becomes kind of a subjective decision. It's just sort of like you get to a yes no answer based on instinct or based on circumstances, but it's not necessarily tied to a business case and an overall decision framework. And so the way to get to that point where you do have a more tangible business framework and a way to make clearer and easier decisions is to make sure that you have, first of all, back to Sam Graham's question, and the answer to that response, making sure that you have a business case and benefits realization plan clearly defined so that making decisions becomes easier. Because someone wants to customize the software, well, let's not just be emotional about it. Make the decision based on emotion or based on a preconceived idea that customization is bad or customization is good or whatever the case may be. Let's make it in the context of, does that does that request for customization add measurable business value, and does it support what we've laid out in the business case? If it helps deliver more business value and makes it more likely that we're going to achieve the ROI and the business benefits we have in our business case, then maybe it's okay to do customization on selective cases. If it's not, then maybe we don't do it. Then we say, no, it doesn't support our business case. It doesn't maximize value. It increases our risk. There's more downside than upside. So no, we're not going to customize in this one example. So, and obviously, you might have hundreds of customization decisions to make in a transformation. And that's just one example. You have other decisions to make around business processes, around integration, data migration, how you're going to design the organization. So all those decisions really need to be made in the context of that broader business case and program management sort of criteria and decision parameters that you put in place up front.
Absolutely. And customization makes me very emotional, which goes to quality assurance. And I think I really want you to just kind of touch on this for our capstone of this conversation, because it really truly is one of the main measurable methods to achieving your benefits realization and maximizing that business value of your new technology.
Yeah, yeah, and so this, yeah, great segue, sort of a add on to the previous question and answer around how do we build that program governance or that project governance within a digital transformation program. And this is the a summary of the framework we use with our clients, whether we're helping advise them behind the scenes, we're advising their PMO on how to manage the project, or whether we're taking a more hands-on, active role, helping support the PMO. Either way, this is the same framework we use. And this, by the way, is the same framework we also use in our expert witness cases. So Kyler mentioned that, we're knee deep in a couple lawsuits that we were hired and retained to be an expert witness for. And in those lawsuits, we have to analyze what went wrong. Why did the project fail? What were the root causes? What were all the things that led up to the failure? And we use the same assessment tool in those extreme failures as we do up front before a project ever starts. So with our clients where we're helping them through the transformation, we use the same framework. So it's sort of a battle tested framework because we look at it and we use it in extreme situations like expert witness and failure related projects, as well as when we are working with clients where maybe they're not at a lawsuit phase, but the project is troubled and it's in trouble, and we'll come in and rescue the project and get the project back on track. This quality assurance framework is the same thing we use there too. So we've sort of downstream battle tested it for problem implementations, but we also use that same framework up front, more importantly and more ideally, to avoid the failures in the first place. And so when you look at this framework, you see that it covers a lot of early cycle types of processes and success factors, but it also addresses everything from the people, process, technology, strategy, data and integration, benefits realization, and performance improvement. All that stuff is addressed within the framework. So it's a matter of looking at your project through these different lenses and ensuring that we use this as a way to mitigate risk along the way and ensure that we have a complete plan too. That's the other part of the value of this framework, is making sure that we have these things baked into the plan so that when we get to the different phases of the project, we can assess risk within this framework as well.
This framework, real quick, Eric, is available for download on our website if you'd like to see it. I did pop our resource page, but you can find it in our thought leadership section of the website if you want to look at this in more detail, because I know it can be hard to see all of this great content on a screen. But with that, Eric, this was such an amazing presentation. And if you might just tell our audience how they can connect with you and follow your thought leadership to be able to continue to engage with your great content.
Yeah, so feel free to follow me on the major social media platforms. I have a YouTube channel. You can follow me there. I put out videos, multiple videos weekly. Primarily Mondays and Thursdays are sort of when the new videos are released. Everything related to digital transformation there. So check out and subscribe to that YouTube channel. You can also follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn, and follow me on TikTok as well. I put out close to daily TikTok videos as well if you're on that platform. So